So now let's turn to the news at hand. As expected, we all predicted it. Jack Smith, the person who the judge in Florida says is not constitutionally entitled to prosecute Donald Trump because he didn't satisfy the constitutional criteria for appointment. He's not a Justice Department official. He's never been confirmed by Congress. But he issued a new indictment, a new grand jury. He didn't want the indictment to be tainted by an old grand jury, as if a grand jury has anything to do with an indictment. A grand jury just rubber stamps the indictment. The indictment is written and approved by prosecutors, by the U.S. Attorney's Office in general, or by the special prosecutor in this case. So he has a new indictment. I've read the new indictment, and it's the old indictment, except it changes a few words here and there and leaves out a few elements here and there. Basically, it says that all of the conduct that Trump is accused of having committed, all of it is conduct that is outside of his role as president of the United States. Of course, the distinction when you're the president between official and private actions when you're the candidate for election, it's a difficult distinction to make. I think I've told you the story once when I asked Jimmy Carter when he was president if he would sign an ad that was in the New York Times for Anatoly Sharansky, the refuseniks dissident who was in prison. And Carter's people told me he would love to do it, but he can't as president. I said, well, can he do it as a private citizen? And the answer I got from his chief domestic advisor, probably right, when you're president of the United States, everything you do is as president. You can't do anything that's not as president. Well, the Supreme Court has said differently, and Jack Smith thinks differently. So we'll see how this case goes. Now, I've read the indictment. The indictment charges, and here's the key point. The indictment charges that Donald Trump knew and believed that he had actually lost the election. How's the government going to prove that? He never said that to anybody. He never wrote that anywhere. Did he ever think it? I don't know. Did he say it on a phone call that was illegally overheard? I doubt it. I mean, I have spoken to President Trump about this. I think he's wrong. I think he lost the election fair and square. Now, I'm not talking about the influence of Russia and all kinds of things external, but in terms of the counting of the votes, just that's what I'm talking about now. I think he lost Georgia. I think he lost Arizona. And I think he lost enough states so that Joe Biden was officially and correctly elected president of the United States. It's not a crime to disbelieve that. In fact, the indictment says that it's not a crime to speak about that and to oppose it. But if he believed it, if he honestly believed it, if he talked himself into it, even if he was wrong, if he believed it, if he thought he had won the election, then everything he's accused of doing is protected by the First Amendment, by Article 2 of the Constitution, by the 12th Amendment. Trying to get alternate slates of electors? Hey, that's what happened in the Tilden Hayes election. That's what happened in Hawaii in, I think, the 1960 election. That's what happened in 2000. That's what happened when Jamie Raskin, my former student, a Democrat who was on the impeachment committee, that's what he tried to do in 2016 when his candidate narrowly lost the election. The Constitution provides for remedies. Now, the indictment says that, president's entitled to do all these things that are lawful, but he's not entitled to do anything that's unlawful. But what makes it unlawful? Well, it's a conspiracy. But conspiracy is just a word. Conspiracy just means an agreement. You can have a conspiracy by 10 people to try to undo an election by demanding a recount. And the indictment admits that that's not criminal. And so, having read the indictment, I think it's an uphill fight for the prosecution to win this case. Now, they will win it. I mean, it's not uphill in the District of Columbia. They could have indicted him for, eating a salami sandwich, and a jury in the District of Columbia will convict. We'll wait and see what the instructions are, whether the instructions require the jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt based on evidence, not based on surmise, but based on hard evidence that Donald Trump actually knew and believed that he had lost the election, and he just was lying through his teeth. I'm reminded there's a Supreme Court case that says, under the religion clause of the First Amendment, a minister can say anything about, a miracle or anything that's obviously hard to believe, as long as he believed it was true. I remember showing that to a friend of mine, a professor who was a minister, a Baptist minister. And he said every minister he knows, and he's a kind of liberal religiously, but he said every minister he knows at some point in his life gets up to give a sermon and says to himself, is this true? And what I say to the congregants true? I mean, did Moses actually go on a mountaintop and deliver the 10 Commandments? Did God give it to Moses literally, or is that a metaphor? Well, I'm telling my congregation, it's literal. I'm telling my congregation that material in the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, but I'm having my doubts about it. My friend, the minister, said every minister he knows has those doubts. So would it follow that if a minister got up and said, I believe, I'll never forget, I have a story that illustrates that. A friend of mine who was a policeman, his name was Frank Burns. He was a great guy, policeman in Cambridge. And he went to a call of domestic violence, and he saw a man with a gun about to kill his wife. And the wife was being used as a human shield. So my friend Frank didn't shoot, and he got shot. And the bullet hit him, and he went to the hospital, and he lived for a while, but ultimately he died. And I was at his funeral. I think I was the only non-cop at the funeral, but I was at the funeral. And the minister, who I knew, he was a Harvard minister as well, talked about how Frank's body is now about to ascend, and he's going higher and higher, and he's about to enter the doors of heaven. And the minister came over to me afterward and said, you're new to this congregation, and you probably are skeptical about that, but I'm talking to my audience, and they want to hear that. They want to hear that Frank's body is on the way to heaven. Could you indict that guy for fraud, for misleading? No, of course not. We know we give tremendous leeway to ministers. We give tremendous leeway to politicians. Would any politician ever survive an investigation in which he was accused of saying something he didn't believe? Come on, of course not. So this is a very tough indictment. It will result in a conviction, but it will very likely be reversed on appeal. If there's no evidence that he believed and knew, if there's just speculation, I don't see how a court of appeals could affirm such a conviction. Maybe they will. So the real question and the subject of today's discussion is timing. There are three possibilities. One, unlikely, that he could be tried and convicted, because as soon as he's tried, he's convicted, that he could be tried before the election. Don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think the prosecutor really wants that to happen. And I think people think that might even help Donald Trump win the election if he's perceived as somebody who's being piled on this way. Maybe already the indictment is going to help the election. I don't know. That's one possibility. The second possibility is he's tried between the election and the inauguration. That's 2 months. And there is time to try him then. And let's assume he's convicted. Well, he can't pardon himself before he becomes president. January 20th, so he has to wait for that. And he could be a convicted felon for at least a number of days before he assumes the presidency. The third is it happens after the inauguration. And again, on the assumption, not saying this is going to happen, but hypothetically on the assumption that Trump is elected president, he could probably pardon himself. It's not clear. There's nothing in the congressional, in the constitutional debates, I've read them, about whether you can pardon yourself. There's an argument suggesting that nobody should be able to act in their own self-interest, but that happens all the time. But even if he can't pardon himself, we know he can fire the special prosecutor, and that would impose a heavy political cost, but he can do that. And he can order his attorney general to dismiss the charges. Now, once there's a conviction, you need the permission of the court. So that would create a very interesting constitutional issue if the court refused to give permission and the president ordered that the prosecution be terminated. So we don't know what the answer to these constitutional questions are. Most likely, there will be a trial only after there's an inauguration, probably after January 20th. And of course, then it all depends on who the president is. And I don't think we're going to see a trial that occurs before the election. The same thing is true with the Florida case. Florida case, I think there's a much more substantial chance that it might be reversed on appeal. The decision by the trial court that Jack Smith was improperly appointed, that could go either way. I've read the decision. It's a very sound, thoughtful decision. The scholars, the so-called scholars, the academics who say there's nothing to her reasoning, no, that's not so. Justice Scalia would have supported it. There are several justices on the Supreme Court who would and will support it. And there are scholars who will and should support it. It's not an easy question. And it's an easy political question for those who want to see Jack Smith go after Donald Trump, but it's a hard academic and constitutional question. So, but that appeal, the Jack Smith has appealed that case, and it will be heard and decided, but it won't be heard and decided in time for there to be a trial before the election. The same thing is true, of course, with the ridiculous self-destructing case in Fulton County, Georgia, where the wrong person is in the dock. The prosecutor should be indicted, prosecuted, and imprisoned for deliberately and willfully committing perjury. We all saw it. Does anybody really have any doubt that her testimony about when she started to have an affair with this guy who she then appointed, I don't know anybody who has any doubt about that not being true. And if it's not true, it's perjury. It's a material fact being testified to in front of a court of law. So she should be the one who's being prosecuted and tried. And that case is also now on appeal, and she'll lose that appeal and she will be disqualified. And if that case ever comes to trial, which I doubt, it will come to trial not only after the next president is inaugurated, but probably years later. It's on a track to hell. So I think these indictments may influence the election. There are some people who say, look, I can't vote for an indicted presidential candidate. There are the others who say, and this is absurd, I've had this argument with my friends, including some very bright ones, including people who I admire and like. They say we cannot vote for somebody who's been convicted in New York of the crime for which he was convicted. No, you're just dead wrong. That's an invalid crime. He didn't commit a crime in New York. That conviction is worthless. It may be affirmed. I don't care. I have to tell you, I know more about criminal law than the people who would affirm or not affirm the conviction. That conviction is invalid. It's clearly invalid. There's nothing to it. There is no crime. Nobody can even tell me what the crime is. It was a misdemeanor. The misdemeanor is barred by the statute of limitations. Suddenly, the misdemeanor becomes a felony based on a multiple choice argument by the prosecution. There's nothing to that case. And anybody who casts his vote against Trump on the basis of that conviction is either a fool or a knave or ignorant. There's nothing to that conviction, and you should not cast a vote based on that conviction. So we're seeing the weaponization of our criminal justice system in New York. We're seeing it in Georgia. We're seeing it in federal court in Florida. We're seeing it in the federal court in the District of Columbia. The American public wants to vote for the next president based on the character of the person, based on the history, based on policies. They don't want to vote based on whether or not some prosecutor somewhere can persuade a grand jury, which doesn't take a lot of talent, to indict somebody, or even to persuade a petty jury in the District of Columbia to convict the man that you all voted against. So my advice to you all is vote your conscience, vote for who you think is going to be the better president, or vote against the person who you think will be the worst president. A lot of people are going to vote that way, but don't take into account these legal cases. Coming from a lawyer, these legal cases are worthless. They are not worth your time. They are certainly not worth your vote. So let's look at some letters. Got a lot of letters now, and we get them all the time. I love your passion. When you vote, I know it will be a very thoughtful choice. No one could ask for more. What bothers me is the people who vote with no more thought than choosing a brand of toilet paper. Well, there really is a difference. That charming stuff. Those ads are very, very compelling. It's usually the brand they brought before. This election may change those habits. Well, I appreciate that because I get at least 100 letters after every show telling me who to vote for. And 90% of them tell me to vote for Donald Trump. They also tell me to announce it now. And no, you're not going to tell me who to vote for. I'm going to decide who to vote for. I'm going to be a thoughtful person and make a thoughtful choice. And I probably won't make it until November 1st. I want to see what happens. I want to see the debate. I want to see the interviews. I want to see what happens if Iran attacks Israel, how they respond. I want to see how Kamala Harris responds to what's going on college campuses today. Donald Trump said he would cut off federal funding for people who endanger the safety of students based on religion. What's Kamala Harris saying about this? She doesn't want to lose a single vote in Michigan. I hope the first question is, how are you going to deal with these college, this violence and this intimidation? I want to hear what she has to say about it. I'm sure she has a standard 2x4 answer that she will memorize and state, but let's at least hear that. And let's hope there are really good, hard follow-up questions. News commentators, the ones who are doing the debate, they're not known for follow-up questions. They just read the news. It's interesting. In England, they're not even called commentators. They're called people who read the news. Read the news. Why should people who read the news be the ones having this debate, asking the questions? You should have people who know how to ask a follow-up question. Mike Wallace used to know how to ask a follow-up question. I suspect his son Chris probably knows how to ask a follow-up question. But the anchors don't know how to ask a follow-up question. That's not part of their job. So I'm not happy with the way these debates are scheduled and are going. Here's an interesting one. A number of people said to me, don't vote based on how people look or are character. Here's one that says, it's not a Valentine, it's a vote. Only policy matters. But here's one that really gives an example, and it's a good example. As far as integrity goes, Jimmy Carter has integrity. We can respect that. He worked on human rights. He devoted his life to good causes. He didn't cheat on his wife. He was a good father, husband, but he was a terrible president. I think that's probably right, certainly on foreign policy. He did some good things. I mean, he did bring about the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, although I don't think he played that major a role in there. If he had really done his job, Egypt would have taken the Gaza Strip and maybe there'd be no problem today. But as you know, Israel offered Egypt to have incorporate the Gaza Strip as part of their country because the citizens, many of them are Egyptians, of Egyptian origin, but Egypt refused and Israel had no choice. And so it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read it. Despite his being a good individual, as the world leader, Carter had poor judgment and made grave mistakes. The repercussions we are experiencing decades later after his presidency. I think that's right. And I think you're absolutely right that you don't vote for character. If you voted for character, you would not have voted for John Kennedy. You would not have voted for several other people. Even Lyndon Johnson had some deep character flaws and was a great, great president. So, I think vote for who you think would do the best job as president, or vote against the person who you think would do the worst job as president. All right, next letter. If Black students were being treated the same as these Jewish students are being treated, it would be stopped and condemned immediately by Harris and leading Democrats. The double standard makes me livid. You're 100% correct. If these were black students who were being prevented from going to class, there would be a very different response. And the excuse is, well, we're not anti-Jewish. We're just anti-Zionist. It happens that the people were stopping from going to class are wearing yarmulkes and Stars of David and are Jewish, but we're not really anti-Jewish. Yeah, we apply a double standard to the Jewish state and to all other states, but we're not really anti-Jewish. Well, you can say we're not anti-black either. We're anti-civil liberties or South Africa. I'm anti-South Africa. I think the South African government is a failed government, one of the worst governments in the world, one of the most extreme, radical, hateful governments in the world. And this is somebody who fought against apartheid, who offered to help represent Nelson Mandela, who gave speeches against apartheid. I think that South Africa is a despicable, hateful country. I'm against South Africa. Yeah, that doesn't make me anti-black, but that's very different than saying I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm not anti-Jewish. I'm just anti all the Jews who support Israel. Remember, again, being a Zionist doesn't mean you support Netanyahu or you support the policies of Israel. It means you support the right of the Jewish people to have a homeland in a place called Israel, considering all the history. And I am a Zionist, and I am proud of that. Okay. Anti-Israel vandals defaced a building at Cornell University on the first day of classes Monday, smashing the glass of the doorway, scrawling hateful messages. These students should be held accountable. Again, if you can imagine, if a student put up a Ku Klux Klan cross or a noose, we had cases like that. The students were immediately disciplined and expelled. But there's a double standard when it comes to anti-Jewish hate and rhetoric. Professor, since the First Amendment is something you obviously hold dear, I'm surprised you have not commented about what's going on in Europe. Well, I have, and I will continue to watch what's going on in Europe. People are being arrested and sentenced to prison for posts they are putting on social media. The head of the widely used social media Telegram has been arrested in France. There are similar threats being made against Elon Musk. Are you concerned? And the answer is, I am concerned. And I'm going to devote a program to that once all the information is in, once I see all the facts. So looking forward to seeing you. I will not be wearing my Superman costume, but I will be 86 years old the next time I see you, because my 86th birthday is on Sunday. So see you then.